Hey, welcome back to the Three Princes of Serendip. We're going to get into chapter 6 now, called the Fearsome Hand, but just by way of review, I want to let you know that the princes are entering India now. They're going to go visit the Queen Parvathi and try to rid her land of the threat of the fearsome hand that comes down out of the sky and then hovers around for a while, snatches up a villager once in a while and throws them into the sea. The only way that they have known to take care of this is to reflect the fearsome hand in a mirror of justice. But the mirror of justice belongs with the Emperor Bahram in Persia, and he would very much like it back to keep peace with his own people. So what the princes are going to try to do is rid the Queen Parvati's land of the threat of the fearsome hand, so that she will return the mirror of justice to Emperor Bahram in Persia. And without further ado, we'll begin this section of our adventure. Chapter 6 of The Three Princes of Serendip by Elizabeth Jamison Hodges, taken from A Tale of Antiquity from the area now known as Sri Lanka. Okay, The Fearsome Hand. Before the three princes had reached the royal capital, the queen sent a party of counselors to welcome them to her country. Among these was the Mahamantrin, her prime minister. He addressed the princes and politely inquired the purpose of their visit. "We have come for our friend, the Emperor Bahram," Balakrama said, "that we may attempt to deliver your noble queen and her fair country from the scourge of the fearsome hand. Also, if fortune gives us success, we shall humbly beg Her Majesty to let us bring back to Persia the mirror of justice." When the Mahamantrin fully understood what the young men wished, he immediately sent word to Queen Parvati. Without delay, the brothers were invited to visit the royal palace and to enter the capital on 3 elephants which she sent to bring them. These mountainous beasts had skins that were nearly white, long ears and eyes of a delicate pink. Around their foreheads were golden circlets like narrow crowns from which hung ornaments and harnesses bedecked with gems. The 3 brothers rode on high seats behind drivers dressed in white. Royal servants walked beside the elephants and with parasols on tall poles kept the princes shaded from the sun. As they proceeded in this way, the party's progress was trumpeted upon a conch shell by one of Her Majesty's musicians, who marched ahead. At the sound he made, throngs came out to see the honored visitors. The women were dressed in their finest clothes and adorned with earrings, beads, and anklets. Men and children ran alongside the guests and tried to get more than a passing glimpse of the 3 strangers. When at last the brothers arrived at the capital, they were led through streets where small shops sold tempting sweets, red and white lotus flowers, and fragrant perfumes to passers-by. Tall mansions rose in many places, and other wonders on all sides seized their eyes until at last they reached the palace. It stood near the center of the city, surrounded by a high wall, in the midst of a park bright with the orange color of flowering kadamba trees. 7 stories high the queen's residence was, built around a great courtyard garden. Being royal guests, the 3 brothers were led to sumptuous apartments and provided with many luxuries for their comfort and delight. Beside each canopied bed were palm-leaf books and a drawing table with brushes and colors. A window on one side gave a splendid view of the courtyard, with yellow-flowered kampaka trees around a small lake and fountain. Also in each room a stringed lute hung on the wall, and nearby was placed a square board for games. After the princes had rested and put on the fine robes which Bahram had given them, they were greeted by a large company of nobles and led through 4 great halls, each larger than the one before. The first was ornamented by wide sheets of cast metal, skillfully incised with pictures and poems from ancient stories. The second had walls of wood, carved with hundreds of figures of men and elephants in a great procession. The third was brilliant with paintings, telling the story of the royal house and the brave exploits of its many monarchs. Nevertheless, the fourth surpassed in beauty all the others, for its walls were decked with jewels, and in it the princes saw a royal throne set with shining rubies. These and the other precious gems, the courtiers said, were of an uncommon magic sort, so brilliant that even on the darkest nights they illumined the whole room. In this place of glittering splendor, the queen received the princes. and to them she matched the room in which she sat. Her alabaster complexion was framed by dark hair drawn to a soft knot at the back of her graceful neck, and on her head rested a delicate golden crown set with hundreds of diamonds. Her jacket was of satin, softly green. Against it glistened an emerald necklace. Her long skirt, dancing with shimmering lights, was of the finest Indian silk and woven in many bands, some golden like the sun, and others white like blossoms of the jasmine vine. Much affected by her elegance, the three princes bowed very low. Then they presented her with gifts from the emperor. These were great quantities of silk brocade, a golden necklace set with peridots, and several books written in an exquisite hand containing the most engaging stories Valram knew. The queen conversed with her visitors and thanked them. She said, "Our hearts welcome you, and I perceive that in your persons kindness and courage meet with mighty rivers of strength and wisdom." After listening and speaking to them longer, she promised to return to Persia the mirror of justice, providing the three young men could in some manner bring to an end the threat of the fearsome hand. When their audience was over, the princes were invited into still another great room. This one had walls of sandalwood, and tables made of porphyry and jasper. Here, while musicians delighted their ears with cheerful tunes, the brothers were entertained at a banquet by a number of the greatest men of the court. So lavish was the feast of curried rice flavored with tamarind, fresh lentils, tender cakes, and rich fruits of the mango and plantain trees, that it lasted long into the night. Nevertheless, the three brothers were up the next morning before dawn, and with the queen, her officers, and other noblemen of the court went down to the shore of the sea. Hardly had the sun risen when a terrifying sight came into view. A gigantic right hand, with its 5 fingers extended, rose up from the water and soared high into the sky. The brothers not only stood amazed, but even their courage was overtaken by a chilling blast of fear. For hours they watched the terrible thing, until the sun was high. It moved slowly along the high road of the sky, or paused here and there, hovering in place. Then suddenly at noon it started upon a frightening descent, moving toward the very place where Queen Parvathi and the others stood. When this happened, the courtiers were ready. The mirror of justice had been placed on the shore, close to the edge of the water. So they're getting ready to show the hand its own reflection, I believe. That's the plan. It's what they've been doing for years. When this happened, the courtiers were ready. The mirror of justice had been placed on the shore, close to the edge of the water. "In past days, before we had the glass," the queen said, "the great hand at any moment of the day might snatch a man from the shore, the city, or a farm, and fling him into the sea. People were afraid to leave their homes, yet those whose work led out of doors had to take the horrible risk of being seized. Today you can see how the mirror prevents such a dreadful raid." The princes watched as the courtiers tilted the glass at an angle to reflect the hand. As they did so, the strange phenomenon in the sky, without seizing anyone, began to sink back. Finally, slowly, it disappeared below the waves from whence it had come. And there's the hand disappearing back into the waves. That night the three brothers consulted among themselves. "The hand seems very bold," Balakrama said. "Until it sees its own reflection," Vijayo said. "If boldness drives boldness away," said Rajasingha, "then what we need is courage. I pray you, let me face this thing alone to try its meaning. I believe I know its purpose. For much reading in the lore of justice now leads me to believe it can be tamed." With much reluctance, the others finally agreed, though this seemed a greater danger than any of them had yet faced. The next morning, the queen, her courtiers, and the 2 oldest princes of Serendip stayed inside the palace. The mirror of justice and all the other people stayed indoors too. Rajasingha alone went to the shore of the sea. As soon as the sun came up, the terrible hand moved slowly out of the water. With 5 fingers extended, it rose higher and higher. The queen and her people watched in silence from the windows of their homes as the great hand hovered high in the sky while the prince stood alone on the shore. The hand was more quiet than it ofttimes was, and the prince gazed up in silence. Then, just as the sun began to set, the hand began a fierce descent. Rushing like a comet, it plummeted toward the very spot where Rajasingha stood. All the birds stopped twittering. Small animals scuttled away with fright. And as the young man watched the great hand swooping towards him out of the deep blue heights of sky, he could not but wonder if his plan were right. But though the terrible scourge racing through the air came nearer and nearer, the valor of the prince's heart held firm. He closed one eye against the sunlight and held out his bare right hand like a shield before his face. No sooner had he done so than the fearsome hand seemed suddenly no larger than his own. At this, Prince Rajasingha laughed aloud. Upon the instant, as if surprised by so much courage, the great hand ceased advancing and hovered for a moment in one place. In this brief comma of time, the prince lifted up his hand again, with all but 2 of his fingers folded. No sooner had he done so than his adversary plunged straight down. It disappeared into the sea with a mighty splash, and Rajasingha stood alone upon the sand. When Queen Parvati, who had watched the whole day through, saw this happen, she was filled with joy and wonder, and her people with her. The latter thought that the 3 visitors, and especially the youngest, must be more than mortal. So great, so overwhelming was their relief, their gratitude, their joy, that they were eager to bow down and worship their deliverers. This, however, the 3 young princes would not permit. The queen called all 3 to her, and the gratefulness of her heart was exceeded only by the curiosity of her mind. By what strange skill and wisdom has the fearsome hand now been subdued? She asked, once she had praised the deed that had been done. Balakrama said, Your Majesty, it was the valor of our youngest brother that overcame the hand, for everywhere, as you must know, true courage meets with quick respect. Yet there was also more to this strange and fortunate event, which he can best explain. Pray do, she said, smiling and turning to Rajasingha. The 3rd prince bowed and said, Since your beauteous majesty asks, I may say that the hand was sent by a power that would try you, and had a particular message to deliver. By extending 5 fingers, it endeavored to say that if only 5 persons in a great nation were united, they could control the people. It was because the hand had not been able to make this message clear, and in consequence was full of fury, that it acted with so much violence. And why did you hold up your own hand with all but 2 fingers folded? She asked. By doing so, Rajasingha said, I acknowledged the message and also signified that if only 2 persons were well united, they could exercise control. I believe this, O great and gentle queen, for as you well know, 2 persons joined in a just cause will draw others unto them. Queen Parvati marveled over and over at the wisdom of the 3 young strangers visiting her. Then she proclaimed a day of celebration in honor of the princes. At her word, the Mahamantrin assembled a great company of musicians, dancers, and actors to entertain and perform a play by a great poet, whose name was Kalidasa. It was to be given in a courtyard of the palace with a stage set at one end. As soon as the queen with nobles of her court and the 3 princes of Serendip had arrived and been seated, 2 of the performers came out, one in the role of a stage manager and the other as an actress. After low bows to the queen and her guests, the first player said they had come to give a play in honor of the 3 brave young visitors to the country. Speaking to his companion, he said, What then shall we present? The actress smiled and replied, Let it be Sakuntala. So, while the 3 princes sat entranced, a play of great sadness, beauty, and joy unfolded before them. They saw Sakuntala, a beautiful lady cast into sorrow. This was because her husband, King Dushyanta, bemused by a magic spell, could not recognize her as his own true bride. In the end, however, a wonderful ring restored his memory and happiness to them both. When the play was over, Prince Rajasingha saw tears still glistening in the eyes of young Queen Parvati. We have seen a story, he said, which moves in beauty like the clouds, sometimes dark with storms, sometimes bright with the dawn. I notice, however, that your eyes are still sad, even though the tale ends happily for Sakuntala and for the king her husband. Alas, the queen said, never do I see this play, but I think of Princess Padmini, my own poor younger sister. Even now she may be wandering through the world, unrecognized by strangers or herself. "How can this be?" Rajasingha said. "It is a sad history," the queen replied, "but since you ask I will tell it to you. Many years ago my grandfather dreamed of a strange white horse, and also of a magician who said, 'Whithersoever this noble animal goes in the space of a single year, the land shall be yours to own and the peoples yours to protect.' Soon after he saw a white charger standing in a bamboo grove near the gates of his palace. Believing this to be a clear sign of his duty, he called in a company of soldiers and said, 'Follow yonder horse which now is pawing the ground beside my bamboo trees. Whithersoever it wanders in the space of a full year, take the lands in my name, and inform the peoples living on them of my full protection.' The soldiers obeyed, and everywhere the horse happened to stray, men and women welcomed the protection of the king, my grandfather, all that is, except members of one fierce tribe. These drove the soldiers back, and were long our enemies. It was one of their nation, we believe, who many years ago expressed his hatred of us by stealing away my sister, when both of us were tiny children. Perhaps he meant to hold her for ransom, but changed his mind. Of this my father had no word, nor have we ever seen her again." Hearing this story, the three brothers were greatly moved, especially Rajasingha. Tears welled into his eyes and ran down his cheeks. "Would that we could restore her to you," he said. "Is there any way by which she might be known?" "My father told me that on the day she disappeared, her dress was of palest blue silk, and she wore about her throat a necklace of tiny links in the shape of crowns. So long has she been gone from us, however, that by now these things could easily be lost." The queen paused for a moment, then said, "Enough. It is not meet that I should burden you, who are our honored guest, with family sorrows." Prince Rajasingha said, "Like an autumn vine, bowed with the glory of its clustered grapes, we are honored to bear even a tiny share of your majesty's royal grief." Then he breathed a sigh of deep sympathy and bowed to her. Queen Parvathi was so touched by his kindness that once again she smiled. Then, musicians having appeared before them, the rest of the day was given over to concerts, feasting, and other happy pastimes. Even so, the princes began to think of going back to Persia. "Let us hope the queen will be ready now to restore the mirror of justice to the Emperor Valram," Balakrama said. "The sooner our errand is accomplished, the sooner we may hope to gain our father's permission to return to Serendip." Vijayo said, "We must also continue our search for death to dragons and for Athenicius." Then, looking thoughtful for a long time, he made and sang this song. The Pantoum for Athenicius. You remember Athenicius, he's the old man who walks in many disguises and turns himself into a bird with fiery eyes. This is a song that Vijayo has written for Athenicius. Where the sudden mountains grow, this old one speeds on foot or wings. He guards the word for dragon woe, long eon sought by noble kings. This old one speeds on foot or wings, with magic in a silver case. Long eon sought by noble kings, a slippery shadow in the chase. With magic in a silver case, he guards the word for dragon woe, a slippery shadow in the chase, where the sudden mountains grow. I got a little excited at the end there, fell off key again, but you're used to that by now. What a great story. So next we'll hit chapter 7, which is called The Queen's Question. So it looks like we'll be spending a little bit more time in India with Queen Parvati. And that is certainly welcome because she's so wonderful, she's so kind, so thankful for the help she's received from the princes. I believe she has some surprises in store. All right, have a wonderful night, sleep well, and have a fantastic tomorrow. Don't forget to bring your kindness, your courage, and your compassion, along with wisdom, to all the surprises that you'll find in the morrow. See you next time.